Imagine feeling an undeniable attraction to the one person you should never desire. Now, picture yourself isolated in a cozy chalet with them, snow falling outside, cutting you off from the rest of the world. This is the reality for Sarah, a 40-year-old mother who finds herself drawn to her 19-year-old stepson. Will she resist temptation or succumb to her deepest desires? Sarah's heart raced as she pulled up to the secluded mountain chalet with Jason. The winding drive had been filled with awkward small talk, and now they faced a weekend alone together. She tried to focus on unpacking the car, but couldn't shake her unease. As they entered the cozy cabin, a gust of frigid wind made Sarah shiver. Jason noticed and moved to start a fire. "I'll get some wood from outside," he offered. Sarah nodded, grateful for the moment alone to collect herself. When Jason returned, arms laden with firewood, Sarah couldn't help but notice how he'd filled out since last summer. His t-shirt clung to his broad shoulders as he effortlessly stacked the logs. She quickly averted her eyes, ashamed of where her mind had wandered. The cabin suddenly felt impossibly small as they maneuvered around each other, putting away groceries and settling in. Their hands brushed, reaching for the same cabinet, sending a jolt through Sarah. She mumbled an apology and retreated to the far side of the kitchen. Looking out the window, Sarah's stomach dropped. Heavy snow was falling fast, blanketing the world in white. "Looks like we might be snowed in," Jason remarked, joining her at the window. Sarah tensed at his proximity, acutely aware of his body heat. As the storm intensified, so did Sarah's internal struggle. She found herself stealing glances at Jason, admiring the strong line of his jaw and the way his t-shirt hinted at toned abs underneath. Each time, she'd force her gaze away, disgusted with herself for seeing her stepson in this light. "Should we watch a movie?" Jason suggested, breaking the tense silence. Sarah agreed, hoping the distraction would quiet her racing thoughts. They settled onto opposite ends of the small sofa, the space between them charged with unspoken tension. As the opening credits rolled, Sarah was hyper-aware of Jason's presence beside her. The flickering firelight cast a warm glow on his features, and she caught the faint scent of his cologne. She gripped the armrest tightly, fighting the urge to close the distance between them. With nowhere to escape and a long night ahead, Sarah steeled herself for the battle between her desires and her conscience. The howling wind outside matched the tumult in her heart as she struggled to keep her feelings in check. All too conscious of the forbidden attraction growing between them, the flickering light from the TV screen cast shadows across Jason's face, highlighting features Sarah had never truly noticed before. How long could she ignore the electric current running between them? As the romantic comedy played out on screen, Sarah became increasingly aware of Jason's presence beside her. The heat radiating from his body seemed to intensify with each passing moment, making her hyper-conscious of their proximity on the small sofa. She tried to focus on the movie, but her mind kept wandering to the young man next to her. Without warning, their hands brushed as they both reached for the popcorn bowl. The accidental touch sent a jolt through Sarah, and she quickly withdrew her hand, her heart racing. She risked a glance at Jason, only to find him already looking her way. Their eyes met for a brief, charged moment before both hastily turned back to the screen. As the movie progressed, Sarah found herself stealing furtive glances at Jason. She couldn't help but admire the strong line of his jaw, the way it had sharpened as he'd matured from boy to man. Each time she caught herself looking, she'd force her gaze away, a mix of guilt and desire churning in her stomach. The air in the room felt thick with unspoken attraction. Every shift on the couch, every shared laugh at the movie's jokes, seemed loaded with meaning. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she realized Jason was sneaking peeks at her too. Their eyes would meet for fleeting seconds before darting away, each encounter leaving her more flustered than the last. The tension built to an unbearable level as the movie's leads shared a passionate on-screen kiss. Sarah felt her cheeks flush, all too aware of Jason's reaction beside her. She could practically feel his gaze on her, and the urge to turn and meet it was almost overwhelming. Unable to bear it any longer, Sarah abruptly stood up. "I need some water," she mumbled, not daring to look at Jason as she hurried from the room. As she retreated, she caught a glimpse of confusion and hurt flashing across his face. The sight only added to the tumult of emotions swirling within her. In the kitchen, Sarah gripped the counter, trying to steady her breathing. She knew she should return to the living room to maintain the illusion of normalcy. But the thought of sitting next to Jason again, Feeling the heat of his body and the weight of unspoken desires made her knees weak. She remained frozen in place, torn between her role as stepmother and the undeniable woman awakening within her. With shaky legs, Sarah retreated to her bedroom. She thought distance would clear her head, but instead, memories of tender moments shared with Jason over the years came flooding back. Had their connection always been more than just familial? Sarah paced back and forth, her heart pounding. She tried to remind herself of her role as Jason's stepmother, but the title felt hollow now. Images of Jason's strong jawline and gentle eyes kept intruding on her attempts at rationality. She recalled the night of her divorce, when Jason had found her crying in the kitchen. He'd wordlessly pulled her into a hug, holding her until the tears subsided. At the time, she'd seen it as a son comforting his mother. Now, she wasn't so sure. Other memories surfaced, shared laughter over inside jokes, lingering glances across the dinner table, the brush of his hand against hers as they did dishes together. Each instance took on new meaning in light of the tension downstairs. Sarah's breath quickened as she considered the possibility that their bond had always held an undercurrent of something more. Against her better judgment, Sarah allowed herself to imagine giving in to her desires. She pictured Jason's strong arms around her, his lips on hers, their bodies intertwined. The fantasy sent a shiver down her spine, equal parts exhilaration and shame. She knew it was wrong, that society would condemn them, but in the privacy of her mind, she couldn't deny the pull she felt towards him. As the storm raged outside, Sarah's internal struggle mirrored its intensity. She vacillated between disgust at herself for having these thoughts and an almost painful longing to act on them. The isolation of the chalet seemed to amplify every emotion, making it impossible to find solid ground. Finally, Sarah realized she couldn't continue this way. The tension between them was palpable, and ignoring it would only make things worse. With trembling hands, she smoothed her hair and took a deep breath. She had to confront Jason, to clear the air between them one way or another. Whatever happened next, she knew their relationship would never be the same. Steeling herself for the conversation ahead, Sarah opened her bedroom door and began the descent back downstairs. Sarah's heart raced with each step downstairs. She was about to cross a line that, once crossed, could never be uncrossed. But what she found when she reached Jason would leave her breathless. As Sarah entered the living room, she saw Jason standing by the window, his gaze fixed on the swirling snow outside. She approached him slowly, her pulse quickening with every step. When Jason turned to face her, Sarah was struck by the vulnerability in his eyes. It mirrored her own conflicted emotions. "We need to talk," Sarah began hesitantly. Jason nodded, his expression a mix of anticipation and fear. They sat down on the couch, maintaining a careful distance between them. Sarah took a deep breath, struggling to find the right words. "I've noticed things changing between us," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Jason's eyes widened slightly, but he remained silent, waiting for her to continue. "I can't ignore it anymore. This tension, this connection, it's not right, but I can't deny it's there." Jason exhaled slowly, his shoulders relaxing slightly. "I've felt it too," he confessed. "I thought I was imagining things, or that I was wrong for feeling this way, but being here with you, alone, it's made everything so much clearer." As they spoke, the storm outside intensified. Wind howled against the windows, echoing the turmoil of emotions swirling within them. Sarah found herself moving closer to Jason, drawn by an invisible force she couldn't resist. "We shouldn't," Sarah murmured, even as her hand reached out to touch Jason's face. He leaned into her touch, his eyes never leaving hers. The air between them crackled with electricity. In a moment of shared weakness, they came together. Their lips met in a passionate kiss, years of repressed desire finally breaking free. Sarah's mind went blank, consumed by the sensation of Jason's mouth on hers, his hands pulling her closer. Reality came crashing back as they pulled apart, both gasping for air. The shock of what they'd done hit them simultaneously. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. Jason looked equally stunned, his chest heaving as he stared at her. The gravity of their actions settled over them like a heavy blanket. They had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, venturing into forbidden territory that threatened to unravel everything they knew. As the storm raged on outside, Sarah and Jason sat in stunned silence. grappling with the consequences of their momentary lapse and the uncertain future that now lay before them. Sarah and Jason sat in stunned silence, the weight of their actions settling over them. The kiss had unleashed a flood of conflicting emotions: desire, guilt, confusion. They knew they could never go back to how things were before. "What do we do now?" Jason asked quietly, his voice trembling. Sarah shook her head, at a loss for words. The future stretched before them, filled with uncertainty. Would they give in to their feelings, risking everything? Or try to bury them and preserve their family? As the storm raged on outside, Sarah and Jason remained frozen in place, grappling with the consequences of crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. Their relationship had fundamentally changed, and only time would tell where this new path would lead them.